Hi, we're not on the range today, we're at one of our training facilities, and you can see the three walls we have set up, two interior walls and an exterior wall. You may have seen this setup before, but we're going to do it again with the same old calibers and the same old type of projectiles. But we're also going to use some new targets, new calibers, new types of projectiles. So although there will be some redundant information, there will also be some new information. And we're doing this because so many viewers have requested seeing a demonstration like this. And we're able to do it because of a very generous donation by a particular viewer. Thank you. So let's take a look at the setup. And here's our first interior wall. Here in the United States, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, interior walls are made of a 2x4 frame with 2x4 studs on 16-inch center and then half-inch thick sheetrock on each side. If you have 2x4 studs on a 16-inch center and you shoot this wall, that gives you about a 10% chance of hitting one of those studs. So to remove that extraneous variable, there are no studs in this wall. Now let's move to our next wall, which is about 8 feet away. And it's again an interior wall, 2x4 frame, no 2x4 studs, and half-inch thick sheetrock on each side. Now before we go to our exterior wall, the question comes up, just how bullet resistant is half-inch thick sheetrock? Let's see if I can demonstrate that. So here's our wall, here's you, and here's a baby Browning in caliber 25 ACP, which I have loaded with Hornady Custom 25 ACP 35 grain jacketed hollow point. And I'll shoot this from 5 yards. Sheetrock is not particularly bullet resistant. So we see that half-inch sheetrock is not very bullet resistant. Now let's take a look at our exterior wall. On the interior of our exterior wall is half-inch sheetrock, and on the exterior is half-inch plywood and particle board siding. The question that comes up in conjunction with exterior walls is about insulation. Now again, there are exceptions, but here in the United States, for the most part, interior walls are not insulated at all, and most exterior walls are insulated with that pink fiberglass with the paper backing. There's a lot of differences of opinion as to just how bullet resistant that material is, and for the lengthy explanation you can watch our presentation entitled Insulation as a Bullet Stop. But for the short version, let's do a demonstration. Well, here's a roll of Owens Corning pink fiberglass insulation. To shoot through this, I'm going to have to shoot through 24 layers, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be thicker than what's in the typical wall. So again, here's you. And again, here's a baby Browning loaded with Hornady Custom 35 grain jacketed hollow point. Let's shoot this from 5 yards. So it would appear insulation is just not much of a bullet stop. So we see insulation, not much of a bullet stop. Sheetrock, not much of a bullet stop. But remember, we only shot through 2 layers of sheetrock. Printer paper isn't much of a bullet stop when you shoot through 2 layers, but when you have a whole box full, it becomes a very significant bullet stop. So what would happen if we went to the other end of our house and shot through all of our walls? Shot through both interior walls and our exterior wall, which is sheetrock on the inside, then plywood, then siding. How safe would innocent bystanders outside the house be? Well, the firearm I'll start with is this M1 carbine, which I have loaded with Remington Green and White Box 30 carbine 110 grain full metal jacket round nose. Let's see what happens with this. Well, I can't see these from where I'm shooting, so my aiming point was off just a little bit, although all of our rounds did go through the wall. So we'll put another jug in place, I'll shift my aiming point, and we'll try this again. So it would appear that your house in its entirety just isn't very bullet resistant. But I'm using full metal jacket ammunition that's made for penetration, and it's not really representative of the type of ammo most people would be using for home defense. So we'll put up some new jugs, and now I have my M1 loaded with Hornady critical defense ammunition, caliber 30 carbine 110 grain FTX projectile, like a ballistic tip. Let's see how well the walls fare against this. So against our expanding projectiles, your walls still didn't do very well. Why? Let me see if I can illustrate that. Now here's you in angry mob form, and I'm going to shoot this from 7 yards with my Sig Sauer M17 caliber 9x19, which is loaded with 115 grain full metal jacket round nose. So our full metal jacket projectile went through our first soda jug and didn't really do all that much damage. Continued on through our entire angry mob and was left laying on the table, all of its energy expended. That's exactly what we expect from full metal jacket ammunition. Not a lot of damage, but quite a bit of penetration. Now we'll put together a new angry mob, and I'll shoot from 7 yards with Winchester White Box 9x19 115 grain jacketed hollow point, and let's see if the effect is any different. So we saw that our FMJ projectile had a lot of penetration, not much damage. Our hollow point is just the opposite. Lots of damage to our first soda jug, and the bullet stuck in the second soda jug. That's all the more it penetrated. It was just concussion that moved these two. Now let's take a close-up look at both of these projectiles. And there's our full metal jacket, and there's our hollow point, and we see a great deal of expansion. So what does all this tell us, and what does it have to do with shooting through sheetrock and plywood? Well, with our full metal jacket projectile, we saw very little deformation, thus quite a bit of penetration through the sheetrock, plywood, and our soda jugs. By contrast, projectiles like soft points, ballistic tips, hollow points are supposed to expand and penetrate less, and we saw that was the case in our soda jugs. But those projectiles expand best in an aqueous medium like soda jugs, water jugs, ballistic gel, or the intended target. And when shooting through something like sheetrock and or plywood, often your expansion is minimal, therefore your penetration is up there pretty close to what you'd get with full metal jacket projectiles. So now let's do this drill again of shooting through all three walls. I've moved the soda jugs down so I'm not shooting through the same bullet holes. And now the rifle I'm going to use is my A1 platform, which I have loaded with Remington Green and White Box 223 Remington 55 grain full metal jacket spear point. Let's see what kind of penetration we get with this. Obviously our 223 Remington full metal jacket ammunition went through pretty easily. However, there's something interesting here. Let's take a look at the other side of this wall, the interior of our exterior wall. Here's the impacts of the 4 shots I fired. However, this is not the pattern in which I fired them, or they appear on the first interior wall. Although the sheetrock will not stop the projectiles, it can deflect their path. And it causes the projectiles to tumble. We can see that 2 of them hit almost perfectly sideways. Now we've got our soda jugs sitting lower, so hopefully we won't shoot through the same holes. And now I have my A1 loaded with Hornady Critical Defense ammunition, caliber 223 Remington 55 grain FTX projectile, like a ballistic tip. Let's see what this does. With our Hornady Critical Defense ammunition, we got some really interesting results. Now this requires going over here and looking at the first wall I shot through. Now I was shooting from the other side, so we're seeing the exit holes. Right here are the exit holes of the 55 grain full metal jacket. Here's the exit holes of the Hornady Critical Defense 55 grain FTX projectile. These are expanding in the sheetrock. Now if we come over here, we see the entrance holes in our second wall. Here's the entrance holes for our 55 grain full metal jacket, and here are the entrance holes for our Hornady Critical Defense ammunition. We can see that those projectiles are to a degree fragmenting. Now let's look at the entrance holes in our exterior wall. Again, here's the tumbling holes of our full metal jacket ammunition, and here are the entrance holes of our critical defense ammunition. So what we see is that even in the medium of sheetrock, those projectiles were expanding. However, that still didn't help us very much because they went clear through the exterior wall and killed the innocent bystander outside. So what we've seen so far is that your walls are just not very bullet resistant. And when you load with some kind of expanding projectile, that doesn't seem to retard the progress of those projectiles very much through this type of medium. Right about now is when questions come up about the penetration of shotgun projectiles through walls like this. Well, we have a presentation entitled Shotguns Don't Suck for Home Defense where I demonstrate in boring detail penetration through a setup just like this. If you want to watch the very tedious process, you can watch that presentation. But for the short version, shotgun projectiles penetrate through this type of medium in direct proportion to the size of the projectile. Double-aught buck went completely through our 3 walls. Number 4 buck was stopped by the plywood of our exterior wall. Large birdshot was stopped by the sheetrock of the 3rd wall. Smaller birdshot was stopped by the sheetrock of the 2nd wall. So the larger your pellet, the greater penetration you get. We also have many presentations where we demonstrate shooting an analog for the intended target called the meat target with a wide variety of different shotgun projectiles. So there's no reason to repeat all of that process today. However, there is a demonstration that combines our wall setup and the meat target. Let me show you what I mean. Here's our meat target and here's our interior wall. Now we know from many previous demonstrations that a fairly heavy load of birdshot fired from close range, what I would consider a realistic home defense distance like 5 yards or less, will do tremendous damage to our meat target. We also know that a heavy load of birdshot will not be stopped by our interior wall. But the question is, will the wall slow down that birdshot enough that it reduces the damage to our meat target to the point where perhaps the meat target will end up in the ICU, not in the morgue? And we'll put that to the test. Now, 2 things about our meat target. First, for those who haven't seen it before, the meat target is leather jacket skin followed by pork steak pectoral, pork ribs, a bag of oranges to simulate lung tissue, more pork ribs on the back, 4 layers of t-shirt on the front, 4 layers on the back, and the whole thing followed by the new and improved high-tech fleece bullet stop. Second, something particular to this meat target. On our way here today, we stopped at the grocery to pick up meat target components, and it occurred to me that we had not brought any t-shirts for the meat target to wear. So we went to the apparel section of Walmart, trying to find something on clearance, and what we found were Jasmine t-shirts. Jasmine t-shirts. Now these were on clearance, but the disturbing thing about them is that they were in the men's department, and this is adult man size 2X. I wonder who expected that there'd be a lot of men out there wearing Jasmine t-shirts. But I digress. Let me get a shotgun and we'll shoot our meat target and see what happens. I'm going to shoot from 5 yards, and we have the meat target set at a fairly low height, and I'm going to shoot from the kneeling, so I'm not shooting through the bullet holes we already made. I have my Mossberg 500 loaded with Remington 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch 1 1/4 ounce of number 4 lead birdshot. Let's see what kind of damage we can do. Let's take a look at the target. So far, this doesn't look too encouraging. The wall didn't even stop the shot cup, which was stuck to the front of the meat target. But I'll take the meat target apart and we'll see what kind of damage we did. Well, I took the meat target apart and our results are kind of mixed. Typically, when I shoot that particular ammunition configuration at a meat target at that distance, we see tremendous damage. In this case, we did see tremendous damage to our pork steak pectoral, and we saw some damage to our ribs on the front of the target. However, the vast majority of pellets were stopped by the ribs on the front of the target. Very few made it through to our orange lung tissue, and they didn't go in very far. So this does look like a lot less damage than we would typically see. So our wall helped us out maybe a little. So we'll put together a new meat target and put it behind our second wall and see if 2 walls can save us. This meat target has incurred very little damage. This duct tape has a few dents in it, but very few holes. However, we know that birdshot can do a lot of damage at very close ranges, but that damage diminishes greatly as those ranges increase. So to what degree was our meat target saved by 2 walls instead of 1, and to what degree was it saved by doubling the distance at which I was shooting? Let's put that to the test. I'll shoot from the same distance, with the same gun, the same ammunition, but with nothing between me and the meat target, and let's see what kind of damage I can do. And there you have it. So it looks like the 2 walls is what saved your bacon, or your pork steak. Now it's the next day and we've reconfigured the walls to decrease the degree to which we're shooting through the same bullet holes. And now I've got a new meat target set up. So what we've seen so far is that At close range, birdshot can do a lot of damage. Hiding behind a wall didn't help you much. Hiding behind 2 walls helped you a great deal. But now I have my Mossberg 500 loaded with Remington green and yellow box 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch number 4 buckshot 27 pellet. Let's see how much our 2 walls can protect you against this. After going through our 2 interior walls, several of those number 4 buckshot pellets penetrated the ribs on the front of the target completely. But those pellets failed to go into our orange lung tissue. So you would still be seriously wounded, but the 2 walls might make the difference between being wounded and being killed. Now I'll put together a new meat target and we'll do this drill again, and now we'll use double-aught buck. So with our Remington 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch double-aught buck 9 pellet, after shooting through both walls, we see that all the pellets went through the ribs on the front of the target, and where they hit ribs broke them. We also see a lot of damage to our orange lung tissue, and several of the pellets went through the ribs on the back of the target, 2 of those pellets being stuck in the ribs. So while shooting through 2 walls can give you a lot of protection from birdshot and a little bit of protection from smaller buckshot, doesn't look like it's doing you any good against big buckshot. Now what we've set up is a situation of the intended target and then an innocent bystander on the other side of this wall. We know that at close ranges, birdshot can do a lot of damage to the intended target, but will seldom achieve 100% penetration. Number 4 buckshot will sometimes achieve 100% penetration, but has very little energy after it does. But what about double-aught buck? We know that it can achieve 100% penetration and often does. But the question is, after it's gone clear through the intended target, will it have lost enough energy so that this wall can provide adequate protection to our innocent bystander? Let's find out. I've got the Mossberg 500 loaded with Remington green and yellow box 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch double-aught buck 9 pellet, and I'll shoot this target from 5 yards. So with the double-aught buck, after penetrating the intended target and going through the wall, the pellet still penetrated the ribs on the front of the target, did some damage to our orange lung tissue, and several of the pellets were stuck in the ribs on the back of the target. So we see that there's a lot of potential for over-penetration with double-aught buck. Now we have 2 new meat targets set up, and we'll repeat this drill, but this time using the A1, which is loaded with Hornady Critical Defense 223 Remington 55 grain FTX projectile. Here's our innocent bystander, and here's where our shotgun projectiles went through earlier, but we see that none of these 223 FTX projectiles penetrated this wall, so our innocent bystander is okay. Now let's take a look at our intended target. So here's our pork steak pectoral, here's the ribs on the front of the target, here's some orange puree, and only one of those projectiles made it through to the ribs on the back of the target. So a lot of damage, very little potential for over-penetration. So if you're looking for a 223 ammunition that's going to be good for home defense, it looks like the Hornady Critical Defense might be the right choice. But is it? Let's try something else. Now I've got a new meat target set up, and we'll do this drill again, but now my A1 rifle is loaded with Remington green and white box 223 Remington 55 grain full metal jacket spear point. And again, I'll shoot from 5 yards. Here's the ribs on the front of our intended target, and you can see they just have 223 caliber holes in them. However, as those projectiles go through, they start to tumble, and so we see a lot of damage to our orange lung tissue, and here's the ribs on the back of the intended target. But what we also saw was that those projectiles went through our wall. Here's the pork steak pectoral on the front of our innocent bystander target, and here's the ribs on the front of our innocent bystander. So this tells us 2 things. One, although the Hornady Critical Defense ammunition was more effective on the intended target, that does not mean that the full metal jacket ammunition was ineffective. It was very effective. But 2, it also shows us that the full metal jacket has a lot greater potential for over-penetration and collateral damage. So for a home defense 223 ammunition, both in terms of effectiveness on the intended target and reducing the potential for over-penetration, the Hornady Critical Defense is the clear winner. Now we're outside our makeshift house and we have some more innocent bystanders, and there's one more caliber I want to discuss, and that's 5.7 by 28. Many people have requested seeing a demonstration of penetration through this medium, so we'll put it to the test. But that has to be prefaced with a few things. First, we have a presentation entitled FN57 Review. We have a presentation comparing the Ruger 57, or 57 as it's sometimes called, with the FN57. We have a presentation entitled FN57 versus the meat target, where I shoot meat targets with a variety of 5.7 by 28 ammunition. So we don't need to rehash any of that here today. But I will shoot through our 2 interior walls and our 1 exterior wall and see what kind of damage I can do to our innocent bystanders. And the ammunition I'm going to start with is FN SS 197 SR ammunition. That's 5.7 by 28 with a 40 grain VMAX projectile like a ballistic tip. And the firearm I'm going to use will be the Ruger 57. So let's see what kind of damage I can do. I fired 6 shots and all 6 achieved 100% penetration, so the walls of your house are not going to stop 5.7 by 28. However, I also only hit 1 of our soda jugs. Why is that? Let me show you something. Here's the first wall I shot, and here's our entrance holes. Let's take a close-up look at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But by the time those projectiles have gone through 2 interior walls and are striking the interior of our exterior wall, they've been deflected and they've tumbled. Let's take a close-up look at these impacts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now we've got new soda jugs set up, and we'll repeat this drill with a different ammunition. Federal American Eagle 5.7 by 28, 40 grain full metal jacket spear point. And with the full metal jacket ammunition, we see a very similar result. Now let's look at the other side of the wall and see how much these projectiles tumbled. Previously I fired 6 shots and got 6 impacts. Now I fired 7, so I should have a total of 13, but I don't. I have a total of 11. Some of them were deflected going over the wall. But let's take a close-up look at the impacts I have. And we see that some of them tumbled very little and some of them tumbled a great deal. Now, as I said before, on previous occasions, we've shot the meat target with 5.7 by 28, and we found that although sometimes the projectiles do achieve 100% penetration, they have virtually 0 energy after they do. So we can take it as axiomatic that if you were shooting the intended target, and then you had an innocent bystander behind them, whether there was or was not an interior wall between the intended target and the innocent bystander, your bystander would probably be okay. But the things I really want people to take away from today's demonstration are, first, although there are some exceptions, the great majority of houses here in the United States are insulated with that pink fiberglass stuff, and we saw that that has basically no bullet-resistant properties at all, despite people's protestations to the contrary. We also saw that common building materials like sheetrock and plywood have very limited bullet-resistant properties. There was perhaps some help going on there if you're talking about a shotgun with small projectiles like small buckshot or birdshot, but we saw with the larger buckshot, the walls didn't help you very much at all. And what I would really hope that people don't take away from this is a mentality that an interior wall isn't much cover, but at least it's better than nothing. No, the great majority of the time it isn't going to be better than nothing. If someone is shooting at you with a rifle of a conventional caliber like 7.62 NATO, 7.62 by 39, 30-30, 5.56 NATO, that wall is not going to help you at all. If someone's shooting at you with a handgun of a conventional caliber like 45 ACP, 40 Smith & Wesson, 9x19, or 5.7 by 28, the great majority of the time, that wall is not going to help you at all. Unless you happen to be the third little pig who built their house out of bricks. But that's a topic for another time. So as always, don't try this at home on what you call a professional, and thanks for watching the Shooting Your Walls video.